Well, good morning, everybody, to Friday Focus on Friday, the 16th of May. I hope your term is going well. We're coming up towards the summer and the exam period here in the UK, but around the world, we're at various different stages. So this morning, my guest, who is a notable LinkedIn user, has something like 32,000 followers. His newsletter, Learning Becoming a Passion, is followed by 7,000 people and read. And it's one that I've read many times over the last few months. And thank you for being here. We're now a year into Friday Focus, so I hope this conversation is going to be thoughtful and practical. And will move you on in your thinking around the process. So I'm just welcome to the broadcast, Dr. Tassos. Morning.
Very good morning to you, Chris. Nice to see you.
And where are you?
I'm actually sunny Bahrain, actually, and it's pretty hot here.
I'm sure. It's a dull morning here in South England, so it's a little bit envious of where you are in the warmth. But just thank you for being here. And you're notable in sharing your thoughts on the education process and what's gone on in schools and your long experience. Just tell us a little bit about your journey to this point, and so just to sort of set the scene of why you're here and why we're having this conversation.
Thank you, Chris. I mean, honestly, education really is my passion, and I'm going really back many, many years. In fact, over 40 years when I was doing my PhD in UK, Nottingham. And at that stage, it was biochemistry. And I was drawn in because I couldn't afford to do my thesis. And in those days, we had typewriters and we had to type our thesis and we had to hire a typist. So I took a job in Leicestershire, and I remember it was a school in Leicestershire called Rawlings. And there I was put in front of a class of students. I was a scientist, but this school needed fractions. It needed me to teach a very low ability to group fractions. And there I was stuck in front of a class. I couldn't even remember how to add fractions, even though I was writing my PhD in science. And the inspirational moment is that this low ability class began to show me the way. That moment of behavior and inspiration, really, that was perhaps the pivotal moment at which I thought I really need to be involved in education. Now, the journey started from UK, and I worked in UK for many years, ended up at Rutland Sixth Form College. And in the 80s, there was a bit of a difficult time in a recession in the UK. We were struggling as a teacher, business, financially, Thatcher time, so we decided to move overseas. And from then on, there began our international career from Cyprus. We tried Cyprus first, but again, a developing country. And the journey then took us all over the world. Our first overseas posting, interestingly enough, was in Bahrain over 30 years ago. And at that stage, with my first experience of developing an international school, and that was really my first flavor of introducing not only A-levels, but my first introduction to the International Baccalaureate, which really was really quite new then to the community. And you'll notice from my CV, that journey has taken us to many continents over the world. I mean, Bahrain, we worked in Dubai, Africa, we've done some time in China, we've done some time in Malaysia. So basically, we're very much a global, I'm a global educator. And my passion is education, and this is it. Everything I do is focused on inspiring the young mind to achieve the best that they can, because I believe every child has got a gift.
And in that, Dr. Tassos, you've seen many systems, and you've experienced. I mean, obviously the the English system in the 1980s was moving to a kind of a free form education process where local leaders made their decisions based on what was going on in the area. and then 1988 the national curriculum came along. But you've experienced systems across the world.
Yeah.
In terms of building school and the kind of models of delivery,
Yeah.
you talk about empowering learners and empowering leaders. What is it about the IB or International Baccalaureate system that you see gives that freedom to teachers and learners?
So it's interesting you say 1988. I do remember, and I was involved in those areas. And in fact, I remember working in Leicestershire across a group of schools on a secondary science curriculum review. And the concept there was empowering students to inquire and take responsibility for their own learning, so that learning became the focus. Now, you will know that the development was very much curriculum driven and government driven, and the barriers to this that we found was all the good work and inquiry work that we did developing student passions was impeded by the fact that testing was the most important thing. So there's challenges that we had in those early years, I remember very clearly, because then we moved to the UAE and started working with the UAE and with the Gulf countries. There were lots of barriers, such as grade C. You have to get 90% of your students to grade C. And of course, inspired students that were able to present and were not exam kids would never get grade Cs. Now I'm going back to your question. Here comes the IB, which is a philosophy, still using the British national curriculum, or in fact, at the moment, we're using the national curriculum, or the school I've just been working with in NYP across the road that's been helping us with our consultation is using American standards. There's nothing to do with curriculum. In fact, the IB gives us the flexibility. So when we plan our curriculum, and I did this in Dubai as well, we took the British curriculum, we compared it to the Cambridge curriculum, we compared it to the Singapore curriculum, and when we planned our curriculum, we actually planned a curriculum that was challenging. So we were teaching year 4 kids year 5 curriculum. The kids didn't know anything about it. Right. Now, how did this work? The concept is about empowering students, because everyone has got different learning styles. And achieving an objective, a curriculum objective, it's not just content. Now, what the IB does, it uses an inquiry. It uses not only factual questions, conceptual questions, debatable questions. So typically in a lesson, an NYP lesson, you'll find a lot of inquiring going on, a lot of questioning going on, a lot of digging deeper, critical thinking on. It doesn't mean that the curriculum objectives are not met. And in my experience over 30 years, and particularly in the school in Dubai, which we managed to get to outstanding as an IB school in curriculum matters, actually you're going to find that the progress is much better. The understanding is better. Students, when they come to their exams, are able to answer them better because they understand the concept. So my thing is about, it's a mindset of empowering learners.
And just so people that are not familiar with IB, because obviously, you know, some people, you know, they talk about the English curriculum, the Australian curriculum, the American curriculum, the Canadian curriculum. Just give us a sort of an overview of what you've just described. You know, because what I'm hearing is that the emphasis is not on the content and its measurement, but the process of learning and how confident learners become in that learning journey.
Absolutely. So if you start from the primary years, the PYP, look, as a head of school or a director or a subject leader, you can use the standards that you want. You can use the British national curriculum expectations. There are benefits of using Cambridge and national curriculum because the standards are very, very clearly defined. So the most important thing that we did many years ago in breaking down the concept from teaching to learning is creating the objectives in student-led objectives. We use the concept of ICANN, the concept of learning ladders, etc. So within a PYP curriculum, we have an inquiry. So in other words, we ask questions that are meaningful, real life questions, community questions, similar content, but how do you apply that content? So if you're learning about the heart, right, so it's not just about, I've got a PowerPoint about the heart, label the valves, label, what's the difference of pulmonary and aorta, etc. It's about, what do these things mean? Why do you need a heart? Do animals have hearts? How are you going to, how do you train your heart, etc. So it's very much, what does it mean to you as a person?
Yeah.
And the other concept is, how are we going to provide service? Because it's not just about learning. What are you going to do with this knowledge? How are you going to apply it?
Yeah.
And as it goes, the PYP ends in a personal presentation. So the students are able to be innovative, take something, and it ends up with a presentation from their passions. They're working in teams and they're presenting their passions, their findings, their innovations. MYP then develops into 8 subject areas. So we're covering the whole curriculum. So not just narrowing down to sciences or maths. We've got the 8 broad areas, which includes arts, includes sports, and we use the same approach. We use the curriculum of choice. You set your curriculum standards, but it's the approaches to learning. It's the approaches to using collaboration, to using critical thinking. And I think number one is trying to find out what makes that person tick, what that child tick. What empowers that student. A lot of young boys are passionate about football. So we're just now doing a project where they're passionate about football, but we've linked it to mathematics, which is called interdisciplinary unit, and we've linked it to biology. So they can still do their football, they can still reflect on their football, they can talk about heart rate, they can work out percentages, and there we've got passionate students learning in their way.
Yeah. And that interdisciplinary learning is the kind of joined up thinking that I know. I mean, you referred to, I know that there's a lot of researchers that will kind of question certain bits, learning styles that's gone in and gone out, and at the moment is talked about, but it's not. I mean, some of the people listening will want me to be saying researchers suggest that it doesn't exist, but I know that learners have preferences. We all, as human beings, have preferences. How that impacts learning, we still need to do some study of that. That's clear. But the interdisciplinary elements of how we apply, just what you've just described, of using maths and measurement and science in sport is so powerful. I mean, if you go into high performance sport, there's a whole element of setting personal bests. How am I going to achieve this? What am I measuring? What are the characteristics today? So it's really seeing learning as a whole, isn't it? And empowering learners to see all the things that we're giving and experiencing are building together. What in yours? You've talked about the children. What does it do in the context of school improvement for staff? How have you seen that impact the staff teams? Because you've been involved in quite a lot of programs of taking schools into success.
I've been involved in programs where, and when we're talking about low level staffing, I mean, you're very fortunate in the UK because your staffing, they all have to do a PGCE, so they're all qualified staff.
Yep.
Throughout my career, over 40 years now, and even now, I'm developing staff that are nowhere near as qualified as the staff in the UK, and yet we're achieving outstanding results. So the mindset of, in my experience, the mindset of the individual and the belief in children and the positive attitude towards learning is what provides high quality teaching and learning. So in my current school, it's a very low budget school in Bahrain, and we've got very much international staff, but it's a growing school. So the first thing we did It took us perhaps 3 months because we had to involve the community, is to review what we're trying to achieve. And over lots of discussions with parents, with students, we made it very, very simple. So number one that we came up with was inspire to learn. Right. So that leads the way. I mean, that says everything about education, right? So if you're not inspired, how are you going to learn? And then we took into consideration, because there's, in Bahrain, there's a lot of technical people, a lot of industry, a lot of innovation going on. And I'm sure, particularly in Saudi and all these districts and in the UAE, enormous innovation going on. So we also put in our vision, the concept of not only inspiring to learn, but learning to innovate.
Yeah.
So, and then we thought, right, innovation is going on. We've got all our alpha learners that are completely innovation. I mean, if you want something done, you ask one of your alpha learners and they will do it for you, right, within seconds. So that was critical, innovation. And the next one was empowerment. So what we decided, we have to empower, right? We can't keep going on thinking that we know everything. So that became our vision. Now that drives then what does high quality teaching and learning looks like in the classroom using this vision. And then we came up with a concept of high quality teaching and learning. And that was very much in line with the IB philosophy. What we found when we looked at our values, when we looked at empowerment, when we looked at personal projects, when we looked at developing children, and interestingly enough, you mentioned something about the learners. Everyone's got different learning styles, absolutely. There is a fantastic tool, and maybe I'm plugging someone here, but...
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
It's GL Assessment. I've been working on them for many, many years.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing tools, particularly the CAP4, which tells us very quickly on the strengths of a student, whether they're verbal learners, non-verbal learners, and also the concept of verbal. If their verbal is low, if they're not very good at language, they've got leading, it's affecting everything that you do. So you then empower them in a different learning style. And then they've got lots of other tools that have helped us on the way. And I've used these all over the world to help me identify learners' needs and able to empower learners.
That's really interesting to hear. I mean, as a, going back 40 years, I was a design technologist and I, led technology departments. We used to have GL assessments and its predecessors. I think it wasn't called that when in those days. I think it was NFER.
NFER, yeah.
That's the. I mean, they still exist, but that idea of, I mean, I was very keen to have verbal, non-verbal, numerical, and the quotients, but also for me the spatial quotient, so that we could see. And for me, it was the non-verbal and the spatial that told me those people that were going to have a particular strength, and we, just like you're saying, we would tailor the curriculum to encourage that, those kind of things. It's really interesting to hear that that's still, it is still a powerful tool, isn't it? And it's good information, and it's really, that's the kind of data to serve the process.
Yeah, very much so. And I think what is inspiring here is that, especially in international schools or schools where your children may be having behavior issues, once you've done the CAP4 and particularly the NGRT, it gives you a clear picture of, and also there's another test called the PASS, which is the attitudes to learning, which is very, very powerful, because if there are issues at home or issues that, that as a leader straight away, and with the teachers, it makes a massive difference on how to plan their lessons. You're not fighting against their grain. You're going back to the concept, right? How am I going to inspire this learner?
Yeah.
How am I going to use their talent to innovate? Very, very powerful tools.
I said at the beginning, this is a conversation. It's really interesting that you mentioned PASS, because some of the work that we've been doing within Smart Curriculum, one of our guys is I'll say Andrew Fell is part of the DFE, or was part, because it's closed down now, but the attendance projects. And in terms of schooling in England, there's this drive on attendance strategy. Now,
Yes.
we want children to be in schools,
Yes.
but I think there's a line between the pull factors encouraging, and then you referred to it earlier. I'm just thinking all sorts of conversation with Matt Pittman. Shout out to Matt Pittman in Australia. He came and talked about his book, The Connection Curriculum, which was really looking at how, exactly as you said a moment ago, joining the conversation with the community, and it's this thing. The pass is about attitudes, and it's about that view of learning, and so important that we as educators are pulling children into the school by having something that they want, rather than this idea that we will push you in because you've got to be there by law. And I think we're losing that as educators in the process. We got so into the sort of planning and accountability and whatever. We need to love learning. We need to love wanting to be in school. You've experienced that in different communities, Dr. Taylor. Does that differ around the world? Does the community?
Well, look, I love what you've just said, because there's a responsibility with, I suppose, the decision makers. Internationally, we're less bound by these decisions. So, for example, we have the autonomy internationally to deliver, let's say, an IB program, and we don't have to take mandatory examinations. Even the MYP, by the end of MYP, there's a choice of e-assessment or IGCSE. And then by the time we get to diploma, we really know which children are passionate about the subjects. And there are so many subject choices at diploma. You're not just bound to 3 or 4 A levels. You can do psychology, sociology, or whatever, so many choices. But by then we know their passions. So what I'm trying to say is, once that pressure framework is removed and schools have more autonomy to develop students' passion, why would a child, I've got a student now and that I met in California online through my LinkedIn. And I'm plugging him because I think he's fantastic. He's 17 years old, Ronald, and he's developed this fantastic app, which is IA based, but it helps students solve mathematical problems very, very quickly, and they love it. Right. So your low achievers are suddenly being inspired by something that they know because they've grown up with this. Right. So can you imagine all these kids that have got behavioral problems and are having to pass exams, but they then put them into innovation? You say, right, why don't we develop more apps? Why don't we become technologically empowered and develop, present? But so they come into school, and they're not coming into school to study curriculum. They're coming into school to innovate. And our way of hidden curriculum is what we keep dropping in the standards and the expectations, because they need a framework. So we ask the critical thinking questions. So the IB has got the opportunity to allow students to develop personal projects, IDU, interdisciplinary projects. If you want to still test, you can test. We have a very rigorous, much more rigorous framework of assessment, self-assessment, peer assessment. Every subject area has got very clear criteria. But what we do is we empower students to self-assess or peer assess. We don't paint the picture that this is a test, guys. We're giving you guidelines. Develop it. You're going to develop even further if you innovate further, or if you do this further, or whatever. So it's about the mindset of empowering learners. It's got to be. You've got to remove the framework from the top. You must get 70% of your children to get why would they want to get IGCSE 70% and above? What does it mean to them? Right? Do they all want to go to degrees? Do they want? How many of our alpha learners even want to go to university anymore? It's just the whole mindset, I think.
And you said something to me yesterday. That whole, the world is changing. I mean, alpha learners are very different. The alpha generation are very different from, excuse me, whether we're baby boomers or wherever we sit in that line. But the world is changing. I don't think you refer to your American student that's developed. There are. I was saying to you that there's two lads in Ireland that I saw that were created this new app called Study Talk, which is an AI-driven study tool made by children, by young people, for young people to support learning. And he's picking up, and I've downloaded it myself. I've got it on my phone, and it's really fascinating. But exactly what you're saying, there have been programs like Apps for Good, where learners were kind of engaged in enterprise projects and developing. But it's that ambition for every learner to find their niche, their thing. It's not I've failed at school. It's I've found the thing, and I'm going to use your. There's something you referred to. Our mind is not a vessel to be filled. It's a fire to be ignited. That's what we're talking about, isn't it? What do you do? How have you approached this? Working with schools, because you referred to a moment ago this leadership mindset.
Yeah.
So what are the steps that you go through with a team that are in place that kind of changes that? What is it that you actually do with people to kind of open that door?
So again, the vision is critical. Now, perhaps we go into a school where the vision is set and hierarchical, and we can't work with the vision. I've been fortunate enough in schools that we're able to get a group of leaders and teachers together to identify the difference between teaching and learning. And the critical mindset here, I think, is the learning mindset. Are we teaching the students curriculum, or are we empowering the students to learn? And I think, that really is the critical decision maker. Is curriculum going to drive the school? Is it going to be results based and curriculum based, and like a train, right? So your curriculum is your train. And I think I wrote an article about this a few years ago. You'll probably find it on my LinkedIn. So you've got your curriculum train and all your subjects, and that's your curriculum at maths, English, science, and your train, and you must complete it by Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2. Every year, these are your targets. So here's your train going along nicely, and by the age of 16, they must do their A-levels and blah, blah, blah. This is your curriculum.
Yep.
How many children have you got on board that train? Right? So, and how about the children that have not actually joined the train? Where are you going to recognize those children that are not curriculum driven, that are, probably incredibly innovative? So the whole mindset is now that I'm saying is, if we focus on learning, every child can learn. The self-belief that every child must make progress, and I think that's a given.
Yeah.
Do we all believe that every child must make progress? And I believe that every child must and can make progress.
Absolutely.
Then the curriculum is just only one of the tools, right? It's only the stuff around it. The human emotions are what make a child become inspired, because after all, they're in charge of their own destiny through the actions they take. The curriculum is only stuff. If you end up in an American school, you're going to be doing a different curriculum, or a British school, different curriculum, or a Chinese school, Singapore, different curriculum. But you're still the same learner. You're still the critical thinker. You're still the one that's going to do the work. So that's the first step in change.
And I agree. And having worked with teams of people that are multinational, and you think, well, their experience of education is quite different. But it's really interesting to reflect back in that that educational experience was valuable in getting them to where they are. It doesn't mean we're all the same, and it doesn't need to be that. And you've reminded me of a conversation I had with a school leader that I was working with. I went in and had that with her, and they were talking about that route to university. And I said, well, okay, so you just told me that 50% of your learners go to university. Where do the other 50% go? Right. And his answer was, do you know, no one's ever asked me, and I don't know the answer. I said, well, that's the saddest thing. is that the concentration is on only 50% of the learners, and that's exactly what you've just said. We've got to have that idea, and that doesn't mean they're not progressing. It's just mean they have a different destination, and it's so it's that changing that mindset of it's not. I would say it's about measurement, not about curriculum in terms of how we would define it. That's the measurement matters. Dr. Tesler, I'm just going to bring in a couple of there's a viewers that are commenting, but I just want to bring in Kanika. Students need to see the value of learning. Yes, that's what we've just been saying. I believe you absolutely. It's necessary to give them the tools to learn with. Yeah, I mean that's empowerment is what Dr. Tazos has been saying, and to teach interpersonal skills and how to communicate. Absolutely, and that's part of the reflection that we're going through. I think she goes on. Kanika, thank you for contributing. And assessments need to change. I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? Is it about measurement, or is it about? It's not just about measurement. Measurement's important because it helps us to reflect, but it's not just about the measure.
Can I come in there, Chris? On this one? It's very, very important. Just think, what do we think? What do we call assessment? Right. So my view of assessment is improvement. So you try something, you improve, you change direction, you adapt, you're self-assessing. And we're doing that all the time. And I think I mentioned this earlier, Chris, with this area now that we're embracing in the world of AI, we're continually reassessing how we do things. So I just want to take my concept of assessment is not test. My concept of assessment is being able to assess the situation around you, look at the indicators, and then make a decision about what your next step is.
We just lost your signal a little bit there, Dr. Tazos. I'm just going to pause for a second. Those of you that are watching will get back to the signal as quickly as we can. I'm just going to give a moment for his signal to come back. While we just wait for the signal to return, just in terms of the show, thank you for watching. If you are watching around the world, you can comment as people are doing so. You can comment through either LinkedIn or through YouTube. Please do leave your comments and we'll respond to them or we'll bring them onto the stage. If you're able to like, share and subscribe, then please do that on whatever platform you are sharing from. It'd be really, it helps us to build the process. I can just see that Dr. Tazos has left for a moment and I'm sure he will rejoin in a minute. So we'll come back to the conversation in a second. This process of having a conversation is intended to be an opportunity to reflect. So thank you for those of you that are joining in the conversation. Just to say, I'm filling in the time while I'm waiting for him to come back. We are now looking to broadcast on YouTube. We have been, and LinkedIn for a while. We will be going back, and so this will be broadcast on Spotify once it's recorded and clipped. We will take this little corner of signal loss. This is the challenge of doing this kind of work across the world. So let me just welcome back to the stage Dr. Tazos. We lost your signal.
Yeah, my apologies. We had I think it was just a brief power cut. After all, we are in Bahrain, so
absolutely. I've just sort of done the usual bit. So no, look, I was just saying this is the thing about broadcasting this way. Thank you for getting back. You were talking about assessment. Let's come back to that.
Yes. So the concept of assessment is about improvement. So I think we need to differentiate between assessment, and I think the contributor then said, well, we need to change assessment. Through the IB philosophy, we're self-assessing, we're assessing with each other, we're not testing. So the concept of assessing is assessing everything around you, whatever you're doing, and finding areas for improvement. And the journey is a continuous journey. So the concept of assessment is making progress. So if everyone is moving forward, then they're making progress. If everyone is improving, they're making progress.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we have got rubrics, but my philosophy is if you're in charge of your own rubric and your own journey, and you understand the progress that you're making, and every child understands the progress they're making, and all right, the rubrics are teachers speak and requirements on by educators and measurements and things like that. The most important measurement is the progress that a child is making. How we measure it, we can empower them, we can develop systems, but as long as the child is inspired and making progress, that's the most important thing, part of what I call assessment. It's what was traditionally called as formative assessment, and the concept of summative assessment or exams as a test, what you know. Well, nowadays with AI, what you know is not as important as the skills and how to use the knowledge that you know.
And that's where learning has changed. Those of us that have been around this for a little while, that was important. When we were learning, we didn't have. I mean, certainly we didn't have computers. We didn't have access to kind of global information as we do now. We didn't have the AI resources, and there's lots of educators talking about the positive and negative sides of it. Yes, of course, with every technology. I remember when people were distrustful of the computer or whatever that might be. But just picking up on what you've just said, the context has changed massively. I'm just going to go back to a comment that Kanika did. She referred to AI a moment ago. AI will be replacing so many jobs. So what remains needs to be taught to our younger generations. That you just referred to AI. Do you just want to talk? Because in our brief, we talked about AI as a potential distraction, digital distraction to learning. Just where do you place AI? It's with us. It's important. What's your feelings about it?
So this is an interesting conversation because I remember many years ago, like you do, Chris, on when the calculator came out and there were riots all over, marches everywhere. So we're perhaps in the same situation. AI is now revolutionizing everything, but like the calculator, AI can be misused or used effectively.
Absolutely.
So we still have the same brain, right? So cognitive retention is still the same. So our thinking skills are still the same, whether AI is here or not. Some people still use the calculator. Now the calculator is going out because everyone can do it on AI. Everyone can speak to AI, and we don't even need a calculator because AI can solve their problems. But at the end of the day is, how are we applying this? How are we evaluating this? How are we using it in our real life? It's not going to get rid of jobs if we keep the human element, reflection. Teaching and learning now, fair enough, we don't need to emphasize so much as content. Have exam boards realize this, that actually in the future, content isn't as important as creativity and empowerment and critical thinking and reflection and reevaluation. And new alpha learners are born with AI. I mean, if you ask an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, they know everything about AI. We're learning from them. So the reason why and high quality teaching and learning is critical is what does learning look like now? Well, it's no different. If you're a great teacher, you're still talking to your kids, you're still getting them to discuss. AI, maybe they've got access to content more, but if AI answers, it doesn't mean that those students have taken on that answer from AI. They're not able to apply that knowledge from AI. So the human element is critical, and high quality learning is about, and I just did an article, you might want to read that on LinkedIn. It's about the power of reflection. What have I learned? Why am I learning it? What does it mean to me? What does it mean to the world? What impact am I going to have? Yeah. So great, it's a great tool, and use it for planning, etc. But don't use it for planning and replace your what you think. One more thing, the danger is if we don't keep there are many. Everyone is distracted digitally. If we don't empower this thought, this reflection, then the cognitive retention and the ability to concentrate is getting less and less. And there are many studies that are saying now that students or adults particularly as well, very quickly revert to AI to find the solution rather than thinking it through themselves and reflecting. Now, longer term, this is where this is my biggest worry. How can we prevent education from becoming dependent on AI and yet retain the thinking skills, which is what we're talking about in IB, is actually the personal passion.
Yeah. And that's we've had. I would say, if you're listening to this, go and read Dr. Tassels' newsletter. It's on his profile, and it really centres on exactly as he said, this idea of reflection. Or go back to a Friday Focus where we talked to Mark Anderson, who is a global AI specialist. They've just written the EdTech playbook. They just go and talk, go and read that material. But they all center on this idea. AI is not about replacement. It's about providing a tool, as all of the other tools that we've talked about, and it's useful. It can be abused, but it's important that we say it and we talk it through. Can I just bring in some of the other comments Dr. Tassels said, just so that you've got, you may know some of these people. So Georgia, thank you for commenting. We need to empower students to progress and learn. And you ask our opinion. We've just talked about that, moving towards this desired objectives. I mean, we've just said AI is a tool, but we need to empower learners to know when to use it, to reflect on what's there and not just present it as the answers. What do there's a lot of people talking about, obviously if you're in the knowledge retention world, replacing, answers, I mean, particularly at A level where people are writing essays and longer form responses. I've said to a lot of teachers that it's around, your ability to ask the different questions. You're going to need to explore different ways, and that's what you're saying, Dr. Tassels, really, isn't it? It's building that skill. Just go, Kanika again. Sorry, thank you. You're very active this morning.
And I think while you're looking at the comments, this concept of A-level questions, again, we're going back to the same thing. And I've also been an examiner for many years, and this is really a message to the boards that are writing these questions. Have we innovated the questions enough to be able to reward the new learners in terms of their creativity, their innovativity? So are we just still asking for mark points? I remember the valve of the heart and giving 1 mark. And yet when a student creates an innovative question because they're much higher level thinking, are we able to reward this in our examinations? And I know that the IB, certainly NYP, has developed in this way. Now, obviously the GCSE and the A-level are still what everyone calls gold standard, but are they gold standard for our innovators? Is this what universities are going to want in the future? Do they just want people that are answering questions according to a system, or do they want to see and reward innovation and inspiration? This is the question I have for our leaders.
It's a great question, and I think you're I think you're absolutely right. I'm not sure that we have got it particularly there yet. And I mean, I'm not involved in the examination process. I've set that aside. I used to do that years ago, like yourself. But it's an issue. So asking teachers whether how they're asking those questions, we need to ask the examiners and the chief examiners, and that whole process is. I think you're absolutely right. It's a challenge.
There is a pressure on teachers to pass the exam and produce results.
Yes.
So, for example, even within the IB, we now do the IGCSE with the IB because it's fine. But what we're doing is we're using the questions as an innovative training for the children to be able to answer the questions. So we're taking the questions and we're creating inquiry. So when they get to the questions, it's not a test. So there is a way of doing it, but still, at the end of the day, we've got second language learners, third language learners, and they're going to have to go and sit that examination. And then they're going to have to be assessed on that examination. You know, we've got children whose reading age is perhaps 7, but his cognitive ability is 120. And when they sit that examination, they're probably going to end up with a 3 or a 4, not because of their understanding, but because of their language. Doesn't mean they're, you know, they are not able because they haven't got the language element. So this is where the IB values all languages.
Yeah. And that's interesting. I mean, because there's always that dissonance that's kind of lauded around neurodiversity. You know, children that, and I use this term because it's what we use, fail at school, but become very successful in life. You know, I've said many times, a system that allows children to fail, to use that expression, has failed. Because it shouldn't allow, and what you're saying is that we need these systems to enable learners to be successful individuals in their lives, and it's about empowering, and it's not just about the measurement. Can I just bring in Jessica Ream has just asked the question, you know, how can we work within archaic systems physically and physiologically, psychologically, that are not set up to keep up with AI? What's your reaction to that?
So look, again, I'm going to go back to base. The human mind hasn't changed. How a child learns has changed in a lot of ways because they're now able to process things and find answers very, very quickly. So as teachers, we can adapt how we want. So in our classrooms, it's still, I think the only thing that we need to change is the mindset. For no one can fail, right? No child can fail. So now I understand that you're being pressurized by systems that measure failure as well as success. But in my mindset, there's no child that can fail if we have the right learning environment. And as teachers and educators, when those doors are closed, we're in charge of the learning environment. So we can inspire every learner.
Yeah, and that comes back to your point about that leadership mindset. You hold that, you know, that's your goal, that's your vision, that every child is going to be successful in it. Now, whether it depends, Jessica, from my point of view, what you mean by not keeping up with. I think there are a lot of teachers that are very aware of lots of different tools and are exposing learners to the different types of tools and how they're used. So we have the systems that we have in the various different countries, but I think the key is leaders need the mindset of making sure that their learners are all empowered, all successful in whatever it be, whether it be sports, whether it be creativity, whether it be academia, whatever it is, because we're all different and we need to build systems that allow that. That's my perspective.
And Chris, I will build up on that completely because AI then is a benefit to us.
Yes.
Because we're able to empower students much easier rather than get them to look at things up in a book or whatever, or find things out. They can find things out quickly. Just get them enthusiastic and get them passionate.
And that's the thing, you know, the opportunity to do it in the classroom and see it there in front of them, and that's the speed perhaps is one of the advantages. I think you're probably the first one that I've heard say that, but I'm sure Mark Anderson and others have probably, you know, been there. I'm not in the classroom anymore, so that's probably not top of my mind. This has been a really interesting conversation, and you know, people are saying so. We've got 10 minutes or so, but the one question that I ask every guest at the end, and I just want to give you a chance to sort of expand a little on it, is this idea of if there was one thing that you could change, you know, after years in the profession and you know, experiencing leadership around the world, if there was one thing you could change and really make a sort of legacy impact on, what would it be?
That's a really, really good question. And having been now countless schools, both as a teacher, a leader, an inspector, an evaluator, Africa, Middle East, China, India, Cyprus, UK. There's just one thing that is in common, and I think this is critical for every teacher in the teaching profession, is that the belief, and I've been passionate about this ever since I stepped into that classroom, behavioural classroom, where these kids were identified as really bad behaviour, and I saw their inner spirit, is that this belief that everyone can achieve and can make progress. Now, if we can develop that belief into the education system, and somehow through all our systems and leadership and metrics, that we put the child's progress first, and that we identify or agree, not identify, because we all know this, that every child does not learn the same way, and every child cannot be assessed by the same tool. I mean, it's fundamentally what we're taught in educational psychology. So if we can at least start the trend of every child can succeed, the systems are only there for measurement, we have got the power in our own classrooms for every child to succeed. And it's not differentiation. It's not the concept of some can. It's about identifying that every child can learn differently, because they can. Somehow, I think this would be an amazing change to fit in with our alpha generation, inspiring these young children who are now coming back and craving for the opportunity to be empowered and to offer their passions.
It's as a lifelong educator, you kind of get that because you've seen learners, and if you've been involved in a community for a period of time, I remember learners coming back to me. You'd be in the street shopping or out and about, and a learner that I've known years ago would come and say, I wish that I'd done it differently, sir. I wish I'd been different, because I'm now. I mean, one lad, I remember, he said, I wish I had learned, because I'm now having to pay for night classes to do what I did with you in the classroom. And you just look, I'm sorry you had to learn that way, but really good that you've learned that lesson, and he's got that passion. And it's that you see that over time. But we need to save him the money. It would be great to have done that earlier on. But yeah, what we're talking about is that. Sorry, go on, carry on.
In the IB, we have 8 areas of learning. It's not just mathematics, science, and English. So we have performing arts. We have physical education. We have individuals and society. So basically, the curriculum is so broad. And even within those subject areas, you can embrace a child's passion, whether it be psychology, sociology, whether it be engineering. Everything is available for every learner. That's the beauty of the IB program. Within its framework, we can empower every learner.
And every learner has their propensity, their desire, their aspiration.
And it's driven by that. By the personal project, the personal passion, the concept of teaching them is changing to inspiring them to learn. Right? So we're no longer, and we've been talking about this for years now. I remember when I was in Leicestershire again many years ago, we were talking about the teacher becoming a facilitator of education. This was at school, and we were trying to do some science work. And at that time, I got heavily criticised by my head of school for not teaching the kids, because I was allowing them to present their ideas. And we're still having this conversation now.
Yeah. I mean, it's strange, isn't it? In that, I saw a presentation the other day from a young lad. I think he was in Bahrain or UAE. I'm not sure where in the region, But he was presenting at 16 that he'd written a book on parenting and his observation on parenting. And it was an internationally released video of him talking about why he'd written the book and what was there, and he was praised and lauded as this is inspirational, this is different. That's no different to what you've just described. Getting children
and
in the
Chris,
class.
who better than to speak about parenting than the children who are on the receiving? Right. So if we constantly tell them what's a good parent, who is the better voice?
Absolutely. And he'd done all the work on researching his friends, but absolutely all power to him, and brilliant. And educators were looking at it and smiling, and you think, well, that's not about just knowledge giving. That's about him researching. That's about him having empathy and understanding, and gone through the process of negotiating a book deal, got it written and printed. And for a 16-year-old, that's quite a step. But there are people that do that, and why not champion those? So, what next for you, Dr. Tazos? What are you concentrating?
Look, I'm working now in Bahrain, and honestly making outstanding progress. We've got our MYP visit on the 24th, and then we're starting with our DP. We're now introducing DP subjects, but I think the bottom line is two things really: mentoring and inspiring staff and students. Because look, this is just a stepping stone in anyone's career. You're only a teacher or a head of an organization for a time span, but your legacy for a child goes a long way. And throughout my 40 years, I've got some pretty inspirational stories, and I'll just tell you one, and I hope my son's not listening. He probably is, but anyway, and the head of this school is not listening, because the head of the school that just employed my son was one of my mentors many years ago, Malcolm, who I worked with from Insight, a very good colleague of mine, Malcolm Greenup. We did this Leaders of Learning program, and we had the same mindset of training leaders and empowering leaders. And once they become outstanding, they tend to take other leaders on with a focus on learning. And I won't mention the name, but this young person was phenomenal, and he really, I picked him up in a PE class, and I thought he's going to be a great leader. And we've kept in touch through our career, and I know that Malcolm will remember him as well. So he then went back to the UK to do his deputy headship. He's now back in UAE, and my son, who just recently got a job in the UAE, says, "Guess who's just employed me?" And you can imagine who's just employed him. And it's just amazing the comeback you get when you inspire leaders. It's just that legacy that you get. You leave a school, but you never leave your the touch that you have on the person. And if all teachers could do that, if all teachers could inspire their students, even one or two of their students, the potential is enormous.
Absolutely, and that's the privilege of the job, isn't it? That is you're laying a foundation for learners to go off and do whatever they want to do with their lives and be successful, and that's the greatest privilege that we can have. And that for those that denigrate the profession, you can't take that piece away.
Exactly.
That's the greatest privilege that we have, and it's been the joy of my life, and I know yours from what you've described. Dr. Tazos, I'm just really grateful for the conversation this morning. I know from the comments that we've been getting that people have appreciated your insights and your input. So thank you so much for being involved. I'm sure our conversation will continue, but just for the moment, we need to conclude now because we've come to an hour of talking. But can I just say again, thank you very much.
And thank you, Chris. If anyone wants to get in touch with me through LinkedIn, I usually take about 10 seconds to reply, so
yes.
You're more than welcome. And if anyone's got any ideas for further newsletters, I'd be more than happy to take your ideas and even work with you to write a newsletter. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, and maybe that's something that we can do. That's do a joint something. But look, I appreciate this conversation. It's certainly been an interesting, and I think we solved the bit in the middle where we lost you for a moment. But thank you very much. I'm just going to, and we'll see you at the next Friday Focus in 2 weeks' time. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much.